Welcome to the Nate KG podcast. I'm your host, Nate KG, and this is a show about jump rope, where I connect with and share the stories of all types of jump ropers, ranging from enthusiasts to elite competitors and everyone in between. Now, usually it's my job to interview other jump ropers in the community and have a discussion, but this episode is going to be a little bit different. This is going to be the coaching hour with Chris Walker, and the reason I'm doing this with Chris is because we've both been certified personal trainers for a while now, and we really wanted to bring light to a lot of different subjects and topics that we've been asked as trainers for a while now. So welcome to the show, Chris. Thanks for being on.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, we had a really good chat last year. You were, I think, second or third person on the show, and I'm really glad that you're back, and it's been really exciting to honestly, dude, to watch all of your progress because you have been putting in some serious work the past year.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it was second on the podcast, I think, after Sonny.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so much I remember you asking actually at the end of the podcast what my forecast is, like what I'm going to do. And I've done way more than I thought I was going to have done the next time I'd be on the podcast in any format. So yeah, I've done so much and it's been hard work, but more than worth it.
Yes. And where I want to start with is actually everything that you accomplished today, because this is a really good place to kind of put a marker in your evolution with jump rope, because you actually did a big performance in front of a school today, among other things, correct?
Correct. Yes. So for a little context, in the UK, once every 2 years, there's a big charity event, and it alternates a bit like the Olympics and other sort of sport events. It alternates between comic relief and sport relief. So one focuses on comedy, one of course focuses on sport. So this year was sport relief, and it just focuses on raising the awareness of sport and being active, and all the schools always participate. So the one that I've been at for the last 2-3 months, doing after school club programs, they invited me in to do a full day workshop with the entire school. So they divided them up by all their classes, had the teachers in, doing all kinds of different bits with different age groups ranging from like 4 years old up to 9. And then at the very end of the day, there was an assembly where I did like a little bit of a speech about me, my journey, and like how this has gained me loads of confidence and how I should like kind of hopefully inspire some of these kids by doing that. And then there was my first ever actual 60-second freestyle routine in front of them. So that speech in front of 300 kids and that routine was the most nervous but also most rewarding thing I've done to date. It was so scary.
Yeah, have you done a lot of presentations before? I don't think we've talked much about this.
So I mean, my other job that I'm in, my optician's job, I train all the staff. So I'm used to presenting material that I'm very familiar with in front of anywhere between sort of 10, maybe 30 people maximum.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm fairly familiar in that group capacity, but doing a speech in front of 300 people is something I am not accustomed to by any stretch. And actually not being a very confident person in general when it comes to performance, despite having done music performance at school and at college, I hated every moment of being on stage, despite what you would expect from someone who seems to enjoy performing. So it was quite nervous, quite nerve-wracking, but I did it.
So,
just about.
Yeah. So what was that like when you started your routine? Because I've been there many, many times, and I know what it's like to have those nerves right before you start. But what was that like for you?
So I'll be honest, I don't know. When people say this, I always disbelieve them, but it was a bit of a blur and I don't really remember it happening anymore. Like I remember before and after, and the whole thing in between just hasn't really processed yet. And I never believe people when they say that, because I'm like, how did you not remember? But for real, I remember being super nervous before starting the speech, and then that just came and went. And then I kind of got them all geared up and was like, oh, everyone ready to see some more tricks? And they were like, yeah. And then everything went quiet. And then I just started. I saw one of the teachers, very kindly get my phone out and start recording. That was the last thing I remember physically seeing through my eyes. If I think back, the rest of it just happened. Mm-hmm. And even though I was obviously really nervous about tripping and whether that would affect the quality of the performance, and obviously it didn't, much to my worry. And I don't even really remember those things really being like affecting me during the moment. Like I would have thought they would have been a really killer to my motivation, but I literally just sailed past them and it just continued happening. And yeah, it was just amazing. So I can't really describe most of it. It just happened. Did you ever feel like that?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, the first few times I did a performance, it was you're so at least I was so terrified to be up in the front. And then you just kind of get through everything, and then you get off stage, and you're like, wow, that was exhilarating. And then once you actually become a little bit more, used to it and a little more excited, it becomes a different sort of fun. Because
Mhm.
once it's kind of old hat in quotes,
Yep.
you get to start watching people's faces like the same way you do, I'm sure, with your optician's job. When you do, you give the presentations, you can watch their faces, or like when you're coaching someone, you can see if it's clicking in their eyes or not, and you can tell if they're paying attention. You start to do that with the performance as well. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty cool. Did you notice anything? We've talked a little bit about this in terms of the routine design and what skills you put in there to make it more impressive. But did you notice anything afterwards? Did you think certain skills were going to pop and certain skills weren't? And were you surprised at all, or did it go exactly as planned? I'm curious, like how that all played out.
That's actually like probably the best question you could have asked because I've got, I think, a really interesting answer. So, for a little context, throughout the day, each class that came in, I did a kind of a very like quick, kind of predetermined little speech to say who I am, about jump rope, etc. And I kind of showed each new class like 4 or 5 basic skills. So I did a Mick, TJ, I did like a turn and also Manny, like just a few things like that, and a push up. And each one obviously got a little bit of a wow out of them because they'd seen some, but they hadn't seen others. So they'd all kind of begun to get familiar with certain skills like that. And obviously, the kids can't tell the difference between a toad and maybe a Kruger because they're under the leg, and that's enough information from them. So most of the routine, actually, they didn't really get as loud as I would have expected just because they'd been seeing jump rope all day. So they were familiar with it at that point. However, I deliberately didn't show any of the kids all day, apart from the ones that were already familiar with it in my program that I do, which is about 10 of them. So less than a percent. All of them, none of them has ever seen a handstand with a rope, like a frog, where you like
Yep.
bound into a handstand and back.
Yep.
And I purposefully put it right in the middle of the routine after a few swings, so I managed to recover a little bit from it, and just suddenly went down, came back up, and carried on with the rest of the routine. And although I didn't realize it at the time, looking back at the video, they went wild. So that kind of went to plan full well. I hoped it would pull off and it would be a surprise, and they did love it. So that kind of worked well for me. I'm so happy that I managed to get that piece at least right, even if the other pieces didn't work well or maybe could have been improved. That part I know worked.
Yeah, it was
So
really cool because you texted me the video of your performance, and it was really fun watching that because
thank you.
it's so fun to see kids go nuts over certain skills,
Yeah.
And I think the reason why I asked that question originally is because um, we had been talking a lot about the skills that you're putting in, and different reps, and how you're organizing it, and you did a phenomenal job turning
Thank
around. And I
you
think
so
that
much.
made a lot. I think that really helped with the way the kids were situated around you. It was really
Mhm.
good. It was a good little intimate setting. But it's interesting because as you do more and more performances, you start to realize a lot of the intricate skills and stuff really come down to you deciding what you want to practice for your own benefit in front of a crowd versus what skills you're planning on having hit really hard. Because the truth is there's really not that many skills that especially kids, but really anyone can really pick up for the first time. Once you've done like a TJ is really cool, that always works. I've always
Yeah.
noticed that the most impressive skills are the ones have your body moving away from your midline, and almost looking like it looks and feels more powerful. Does that make sense? Versus like
Yeah, yeah.
a
I mean,
swing.
instantly, what comes to mind is Jimmy's mix. When Jimmy does a triple under mick and the way he splits his legs, it's just so eye catching. But for that exact reason, just like our TJ, when the leg split, it looks so like jaw dropping. Even on third, fourth, sixth watches, So yeah, I totally get where you're coming from, and you're right. Like taking the intricacies of like the skills, really, they're not going to pick that up on the first watch. So it's information that you might watch and pick up and appreciate, but you've got to think of the context of who's watching it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those kids, I want to see interesting movements that they can understand, which is why there's a kind of weird wrap in there that I got from Seth, where my arm wraps over my arm, and I kind of do it on a box jump over the rope, because it's such a unique body movement, but not an overly difficult skill. The kids love seeing it because it's different from every other skill I've done in that video,
Mm-hmm.
like that routine so far. And I tried to put deliberately those kind of body movements in there so they could pick up what my body was doing in those weird sort of ways, rather than necessarily, my hands were in this placement versus a very similar but different placement.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that I did it enough to keep them entertained throughout the whole thing. And I mean, at least the frog definitely worked. So
Oh yeah, I
yeah,
mean
one
you
skill
for
out of all of
sure.
them.
Yeah, you for sure did. And the other part of that too is that you can't, at least with performances from what I've seen, you can't really keep the audience 100% engaged for 100% of the performance.
Yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? Because there's just naturally like a pause. I mean, obviously, if you have like 10 different people who are just doing flips the entire time, you're probably going to get close to that. But like, yeah, dude, you did a really good job, and the kids were all about
Thank you
it.
so much.
Because I've been in front of crowds as the one performing where the kids have not been 100%
That has
about
to
it.
be so awkward, right?
Yeah, it gets to the point where you just kind of default and do a butt jump. You're like, guys, check this out, and you do a butt jump, and they're like, wow, and then you get up, and then you're done. But yeah, that just happens with
Brilliant.
like misses and stuff. But what's really cool about doing performances is that you can't. I mean, if you're competitive, this is a very good utility. If you're not, it's just good to refine your skills. It's a good spot to practice new skills that you're trying to really lock down, like new skills or new combos. Because,
Yeah.
and tell me how you felt about this when you were in front of the crowd. Did that feel different than when you were practicing in the gym?
Oh, 100%. Like, I can't even describe why it felt different. It just did. The amount of energy I had was a different kind of energy. And to be fair, actually a good example, the only example I can really draw to mind is that when I came out of one skill and I would swing, turn around and prepare for the next skill, I really, in my mind, the swing felt like it was just like me flowing into the next part and like getting ready. Whereas in the gym, I hate them swings because I'm trying to make sure everything's as technically like sound as possible. And obviously excessive swings, like for example, just isn't adding anything in that gym because I'm trying to hit hard skills. But in that performance, they're how I move across the room, and they flow, and so they are necessary and important in that context. If you're going to go from one skill to another, but there's not another clean way, that swing may be the cleanest way. And actually, the energy from that, actually, I enjoyed how that energy flowed. Whereas in the gym, I would have put a stop and a pin in it, moved on to the next thing. It would have been very on and off because I'm conserving energy for the skill acquisition or the practice or the efficiency. Isn't as much flow.
Yeah, that adrenaline during the performance really keeps you going. Like it really,
For sure.
yeah, it makes you just go, go, and go. So it's kind of interesting. Let's kind of transition here into, I guess, our next main topic, which is something that we all feel, which is the struggle of learning a new skill. And
Oh
it's
man.
kind of interesting because when you're at a performance, it has for me in the past almost felt like having to relearn the skill in front of a group because weird things happen and your hands and your feet and your body, they just don't act the way they normally would on some
Mhm.
skills. But
Yeah,
in
yeah, because
terms of,
they freeze and you get it's because of the adrenaline and the nerves. So mm.
yeah, exactly. So in terms of learning new skills, what was the most recent skill that you've been working on that for whatever reason just was not clicking, and how did that feel?
Do you know what? I think it would have to actually be the frog, which is quite relevant, because handstands for me is something that I've always kind of had a love-hate relationship with,
Mm-hmm.
either from muscle tightnesses or a lack of balance.
Mm-hmm.
And to then try to do a handstand with a rope has been something that you've personally watched me try and conquer for the last 8, 9 months.
Yep.
Now, once I got to the point where I could just kick into a handstand, that was fine, but there's no flow in that. And it's very detached from the bounding, jumping, flowing of an actual jump rope frog. So to then get like a bounding or like even like a split bound properly, that's been really hard because there's a fear of, diving to the floor with your hands not being in front of your face. Having that rope controls the rope sort of stalls and lands on the floor in the right shape. And then also just, not buckling and hitting the floor and like busting your nose. And then also having control to come back out and, working all those different pieces. So that's definitely been the most recent proper skill that finally just clicked one day. And to be fair, you and Emma Trumbull were the ones that gave me the right advice that just made the sense for me to get it.
When did it click, and I guess why, if you know why it clicked?
Okay. So funny story. Things for me always become recontextualized to a whole new level when I have to teach someone else something.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my little tricks for having a superb memory or being able to learn things quicker is forcing myself into a situation where I have to teach something, even if I only know it to like that 80% confident level,
Mm-hmm.
because it forces me to get to the point where I know it well enough to be able to teach it. Because I strongly believe that if you don't truly know something, or you truly know something, if you're able to explain it to a complete beginner in a way that makes sense to them, that's like the true test. So I use that a lot. And I have one of my good friends who I've trained a lot with at the gym, and I know how his brain thinks. I then took him upstairs and was like, dude, let's just try frogs. He didn't do it with a rope, but I did it with a rope. And I tried to see if I could explain it in a way that would recontextualize it. And that's when it clicked. And his frogs were instantly probably better than mine because his balance is way better than mine and his upper body's a bit stronger. So it kind of was like a visual representation and obviously internal when I then did mine that it clicked finally because the analogies I used and the recontextualization of what I thought I knew took it to a different level. So I like to do that a lot, and that's how I did it on this occasion as well.
Yeah, and I think that's really what makes a good coach. I mean, you said a lot of things in there that are, I think, very easy to pass up, but I kind of want to put a pin in because
sure,
a coach is just so much different than someone who's talented at the skill. And you can have both for sure. But being a coach is a completely different skill set. And it's been interesting for me. I'm sure you've picked this up in recent years, but for me over the past decade plus that I've been jumping and watching a lot of different people put themselves out as coaches, and not even just in the jump rope space, honestly, but just through life, watching different people say that they're coaches, and kind of, I've always really dialed in to how people coach and whether or not the message is effective. Communication has kind of always been a thing for me. So I've just naturally paid attention to that without knowing. And it's interesting to watch some people who say that they are coaches, but when you actually dial into the message, saying the exact same thing over and over and over, in my opinion, and let me know what you think here, is not necessarily coaching, because I think a coach is more flexible and adapts specifically to what the athlete needs and is able to draw from a huge reservoir of different metaphors and ways of explaining. And a good example of this is actually, so on DM sometime when people will DM me, and they want some skill tips, sometimes I'll give just like a metaphor and explain it a certain way. And then for the people that I know are a little bit different, like for this last week, one of my friends who's an engineer just started picking up jump roping, and he wanted some tips, and he sent me a video. I didn't say anything to him at all. I just took his profile view, and his elbows were down by his side against his rib, so his bicep was effectively vertical. And so I drew a red line vertical down on his bicep, and then his forearms were at about a 45-degree angle in front of the body. So I went, down one, down two. So there's just two lines right there. Then I took a blue line and I put it where the bicep should be, which is angled back. So the elbow would be positioned behind the midline, not in line with it. So there's a blue line going back, kind of like a caret sign, like a sideways V.
Yeah.
And I didn't say any words, just sent him that picture back. And he's like, oh, I get it. Because he's an engineer. And to him, that kind of like a diagram and that geometry way of going about things makes way more sense. And then we talked later on the phone, and I told him, imagine shaking water off of your hands. And he was like, oh, I get how that's supposed to feel. So like there's all these different ways you can go about doing that.
Yeah. And that's like comes down to the importance of context, right? Because you could just read off of an article, a Wikipedia article, how to jump the rope, and most of it's not going to make sense to anybody except the right person. And I think what you're touching on is a good coach is different from someone who just knows a lot about a subject, because rather than just bestowing knowledge and like just coming out of you, they're able to choose what to say and how to say it, because they can they can put themselves in the shoes of the learner and understand what would I need to hear in that position to get it. And whether that's, a different analogy, whether it's a diagram, whether it's describing a feeling, all these pieces come together. And that's when you say like having this reservoir of information and then all these different ways to, get that information across the bridge between you and them is where the skill of coaching comes in. You can be skilled at doing something, but you can also be skilled at teaching that skill. And that's, I think, the difference. I think that's the biggest difference. And it's an important difference.
It's very important. And I think that everyone should always be, monitoring their own, like their coach is monitoring their progress in that skill and that craft, but they should, the athlete should also be looking at their coach and monitoring their effectiveness as well. Because people so often will say like, I'm just not good enough and that's why I can't get it. And a lot of times I
hear that so much.
Yeah. And a lot of times it does come down to practice, because you have to actually do the reps to make any progress, right? But if you're never getting anything, or at least if it's never making sense to you mentally, that's a good point to start looking at your coach and paying attention to how they're coaching and seeing if maybe A, they're just not effective as a coach, or B, they're not effective for you, because that is very real. They might not be a bad coach. They just might be very good with a certain type of individual.
And then because, personalities and the way we learn can be so varied, even in the same skill, you have to be able to pair that up properly. And a good coach is someone who, like you said earlier, can adapt to that person in front of them so that they're the right coach for that person when they need to be. Because you might have an absolute beginner message you, or you might have that engineer message you, or you might have, a top athlete, and they all need a different answer to maybe the same question. And so it's how you answer it, how you adapt to it, that makes the biggest difference.
Yeah, and I think that, when it comes to struggling while you're learning a new skill, like that is definitely going to happen in many. Like you might struggle with just actually completing the skill, or you might struggle with the mental aspect of trying to do it, but regardless, you're going to feel some kind of struggle, but know that your coach is there to help you get through that and give you the keys to unlock those skills.
Yeah, it always kind of makes me feel sad a little bit on the inside when people are very quick to say, oh, I just can't do this and I'll never do this, or I'm not good enough to do this. And I always remind them that like the human body and the mind are very, very impressive pieces of kit you've got. And one of them's like software and one of them's like hardware. Now the hardware will have a physical limit on what it can and can't do. But most people will never reach that level where they're actually, at that ceiling. They have so much potential, and it comes down to how the software is written. But the beautiful thing about software is it can be rewritten. And that's where the right coach comes in to help that person rewrite software, whether it's, the smallest piece of code or an entire document that makes things just click. And I think that's kind of an interesting way to look at it, and how I always explain it, whether I'm training a 50-year-old client or a 5-year-old client. I always have that mental picture in my head, because it's just a matter of getting those two pieces of the software and the hardware to work together to produce the effect you want. And that and as a coach, and also having my own coach, my own mentor, I expect them to help me write my own software as much as my clients expect me to help me write their software, because there'll be things I struggle with that I need recontextualized, regardless of how much I think I might know or might understand. There's going to be limits to myself, and that's when even the coach needs a coach to help that software. And that's why I like to think of it in that way, because if you think of it like a computer, hardware always does improve, but it gets to a plateau in terms of how useful it is, and then it comes down to how well that software is written and how useful it is to the person using the computer. So I like that analogy quite a lot.
Yeah, that's a really good one. That makes actually a lot of sense.
Using that as a context for the next question, what's the hardest or most frustrating skill that you've had to learn? What's one you struggled with the most? Thinking of it in this context of software and hardware, and why? Was it hardware? Was it software, or a mixture of both? Talk to me about it.
So there's two that come to mind. One I've talked about before, so I won't spend too much time on it, but the Sunny D. So a handstand.
I knew you was going to say that.
Yeah, and the handstand and then pulling the rope backwards underneath my feet on the way down. I did that one at Nationals and then came home, and that same week was in the gym and I couldn't get it. And I was really mad because of the exact thing you just said. Like, I knew I could do it. I knew my body was capable of doing it, but I didn't quite understand how to execute it the right way. And I'm actually, as of late, like I've been kind of looking at this skill again, because there's something about the Sunny D that I need to figure out, because there's a way to do it very easily, and I need to find that unlock skill, because I usually just try to muscle through it, and that's not efficient. But
yeah, it's brute force, right? But that's not always the best way, or the most safe way.
It's usually not the case with most jump rope skills, period, is brute forcing.
Yeah.
But like there's a certain hand movement, certain foot movement that makes the skill a lot easier, because I've watched it in a lot of jumpers recently. I just need to figure it out, how it's done with myself. But when I was first learning it, it was really annoying because I did it literally 100 times in a row at practice, and I literally failed every single 100 of those reps until I got to like 101 or 102, and then I finally hit it once, and I packed up my stuff and left because I had it, and I had it on camera, and I got it, and I was like, all right, I'm out of here, I'm done with this. But that was,
it counts. So
yeah, it did count. And it was like, what was annoying is I was landing on the rope. Like, this wasn't like landing with my feet and then pulling it against my calves. I was on it. So yeah, that was frustrating.
More frustrating. I feel your pain,
because you're like right at the threshold and you only need a minor adjustment. But keep in mind too, like I was at the gym by myself figuring this out. Like I didn't have a coach. It was just me figuring it out.
Yeah.
Which is pretty common in jump rope. But yeah, it just took a lot of repetitions, and a lot of people would come into the room and then just leave, because if you've ever been around a Sunny D, they sound really, really loud when you miss. I mean, they sound loud, period, but like you hit the ground so hard that there's something really brutal about it. And I think people got kind of intimidated.
I think it's because the way your arms come out, you're almost like slamming that, all that momentum coming over your shoulder and then into your feet. So whereas with a normal like frog, it's not quite the same. You can use that energy. So I can imagine it sounding pretty brutal, and anyone that was underneath you, like on the floor below, probably wondering what was going on.
Yeah. And then someone on I think it's Kevin just did Sunny D TS, which is absolutely ridiculous.
No, I know Luke Boone just did a Sunny D cross, but a Sunny D TS.
TS.
For anybody that's not sure with the TS, is behind the back cross. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's the amount of difficult, like I honestly
that's like level 9,000. It's like ridiculous.
Yeah, like even as a coach, I'm at a loss as to how to describe that level of difficulty, because it's ridiculous. You have to get really high in the air, and you have to be really proficient with that TS placement. But
well, I mean, what cheat codes is he using? That's the only question I have.
For real. I mean, honestly though, the other skill that I was thinking about, this one was a lot more recent, was
okay, interesting. How recent are we talking?
Probably within the last like 6 months, 6 to 8 months. I think Marius did this one. He asked me about it. I forget. I think he might have done it. I'm not sure. But it was a swing cross, switch cross TJ open quad. So you swing the rope.
That's a mouthful.
You cross it, and then you switch which hand is on top in the cross. As you do that, you go into a toed placement and then pull it open. And the reason why this was really hard is that like that skill is not that hard for me necessarily in terms of, bound height and proficiency and getting it done.
Hmm.
I think I might have pulled it once, or I might not have. I might have like landed on my feet because the switch cross part terrifies me because I know that if I mess that up, I'm going to whip myself straight down the middle of my back. And I know how bad that feels. And like, I just
Yeah, yeah.
didn't,
And you use a beaded rope a lot, which is like infinitely worse because
yeah, I mean,
those things hit hard.
for that one, I think I switched to a long handle licorice just because I wanted to make it easier for myself. But like
Yeah, yeah.
the idea of whipping me. So back to software versus hardware. Software wise, I was not willing to speed up the rope past a certain amount because I knew that if it hit, it was gonna hurt really bad. So what was happening was the swing cross was really slow for a quad, and then once I hit the toad placement, I would whip it around because I knew what that's like. The problem is, if you imagine like a graph of speed, it wasn't a consistent speed. It was
Hmm.
really slow, then it went up really fast, and it just wasn't good. And then I kept, tripping out on whether or not I was gonna smack myself in the switch cross.
Yeah, yeah. You wasn't really committing to it on a software level, and that was just
Yes,
holding it back. No matter how much you wanted to admit you wanted it, you obviously didn't because the software just wasn't cooperating.
yep,
Um, and I get that.
yeah, exactly.
Switch crosses
So
are awful though for that. I mean, because it's such a timing based skill to be able to switch without opening at just the right point. Like then in a quad, it's just yeah. I can understand why you'd feel that way. Did you? So you said you got it in the end?
I don't think
You
I
won?
did. I can't remember feeling successful. So I think I either like, yeah, I think I either like landed, like I know that the rope was underneath my toes at a certain point. So either landed on the rope or like I landed and pulled it through. You know what I mean? Where like you don't actually like
Yeah.
you technically got the skill, but like it wasn't clean. So I
So
think it was one
it
of
was a
those.
gross, but I got it kind of moment.
Yeah, but like barely got it. Like I think I just pulled it out from underneath my toes.
Gross, but I barely got it.
Yeah, and that was good enough for me, and then I just left.
Yeah,
But yeah, and then
yeah, yeah.
after that, I went and stretched, which is kind of what I want to talk about next.
Hmm.
Because we were chatting about this a little bit and kind of game planning what we were going to talk about with this coaches hour, and the first thing, in terms of tangible coaching advice that we could offer that popped up was stretching and
Yeah.
why it's
This is a
relevant.
super important topic, which is also hardly talked about or really considered by most people. Because I mean, who wants to stretch? Like, who has the time or care to stretch? It doesn't sound fun, doesn't feel fun, but it's super important, right?
It's really super important, but I do think that a lot of people talk about it. I don't think they talk about it correctly though, because it's always something along the lines of like, make sure you do arm swings and make sure you touch your toes and then, bring your arms back and forth across your body and then get to it. And it's
I've heard that a
so,
lot.
yeah. And it's so, and like you see a lot in like blog posts and stuff online. Like there's so much more to it in terms of mobility and, yeah, and the way to break it apart. But let's kind of dig into it because when we were talking about this briefly off air, you had mentioned there were 4 different categories that you wanted to bring up and discuss.
Yes. So the first one is what I would consider like warm up stretches. So those are normally the static stretches you do after you've done like a few minutes of warming up, getting the heart rate up to the right level. They're always, at least as I understand, they're always done standing up to keep the blood pressure high enough that your warm up's not ineffective. Um, and they're literally just to make sure your muscles are the blood's in the right place before you start, so you don't pull a muscle. Then you also have like exercise specific, which are very similar to the warm up ones, but they're often dynamic and you increase the range of motion. So the ones you mentioned are actually they fall in that camp. So for example, if you're going to do say like a discus or something with an arm throw kind of movement, you're going to want to do some kind of shoulder joint mobility exercise where you're increasing the range of motion to get blood to the whole area and make sure all of the muscles are comfortable and there's no tightnesses. And then the third one is like a warm down. So these are normally done sitting down or lying down after you've done like a warm down cardio based exercise. So your heart rates and your blood pressures are a little bit lower. And these are just to make sure that your muscles return to the right length after they've been trained. 'Cause they're normally quite tight and been trained heavily. So you make sure that the right length going out at a gym. And then the last type are, I think, if I'm going to get this right, like PNF, which you're probably going to be able to tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I think they stand for proprietary or preceptive neuromuscular facilitation, which is a long way round of saying it helps increase the length of a muscle or how long it can be. And my favorite analogy in this case, for anybody that didn't mean anything to, is your muscles can stretch pretty much double their resting length, but they never do, because to do that quickly is quite dangerous, like you're going to snap. So your body has this built-in mechanism where it's like a seatbelt. So if you pull the seatbelt too hard, too quickly, it snaps and locks. And your muscles do exactly the same thing. But obviously that locking mechanism is often too soon, and it's not effective, not useful, it's not helpful. So doing a PNF stretch helps push that back a little bit, teach your body that it's okay for this range of motion, which is often caused by an imbalance, so that you can have a better range of motion. Where, if you're trying to learn the splits, for example. So at least in my mind, those are kind of the four important types of stretches. And I mean, already we've kind of dived into a lot more than your original kind of quick description of what a gym goer would say a stretch is. Do you agree with those kind of four categories? Have you got anything that you want to kind of add, and which one do you want to talk about first?
Yeah, I mean, I think with warm down or cool down, would you consider that to be the category for static stretching as well?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. Because again, it's important that you're trying to bring your heart rate down, and a dynamic stretch is going to only raise your blood pressure a little bit and keep you active, right? So you're trying to actually cool the body down, relax, slow down. They're longer stretches in general, so I think it is important to do those as static as well.
Mm-hmm.
But they may be a different type of stretch than the standing one, or done in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if it was a glute stretch can quite easily be done on the floor, like a pigeon pose.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if it was a standing up one, personally, because I've got okay balance, I'll lift that same leg up over my knee, so I'm in the kind of a half kind of cross leg position, but I'll be standing up, and then I'll kind of half sit down whilst balancing, like holding onto like a wall or a post, so I can kind of be in that same kind of position, put my leg under the stretch, but I'm still upright, I'm still standing, so I have the increased blood pressure, keeping my heart going from the warm up. So it's effectively the exact same stretch, but one standing and one sitting. So yeah, both static, and I think that's important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You need to get the body warm before you go hard at the in the workout, and then you have to cool down at the end. And so I want to stick on this, and I want to go to the neuromuscular training in a second. The reason why, warming up is important for pretty straightforward reasons, which is just to get the body ready for whatever exertion you're going to put into it. Because if you go 0 to 100,
sure.
If you try that with a car, you're going to redline, right? You have to go through each of the gear switches. But the cool down is really, really important for a very specific biological reason. And when you engage in the lowest level of activity, so depending on what you're looking at and who you're reading, there's several layers or intensity zones of training. When you go to the lowest level, that can either be, level 1 or level 6. It's weird. They usually flip flop, but I'm going to refer to it as level 6 intensity zone, which is the lowest. So when you're in that, level 6 intensity zone, because your body is still moving and you're calmly bringing it down, it's flushing your system and getting rid of a lot of smaller, I guess the word is like monocytes and other things that kind of build up in your body when you're doing workouts. So if you go, for example, half an hour of intense jumping, 20 minutes or so of intense weightlifting, and then you just leave the gym, you're really doing yourself a massive disservice in terms of your immunity. And if you take another 10 to 15 minutes to just slowly cool down, like you were talking about, there can be static stretches. You can do even like really easy squats, or like air squats, or easy mobility walking drills. Like we can do dynamic stretching if we want, but it has to be very low level, so that, like you said, your heart rate is coming down. Doing that and moving the body around really, it really makes you a lot more likely to A, not get sick, and B, take all of those strength gains that you just made and then up them another couple levels. And that's a thing that I think a lot of people know in their mind, okay, I should warm up or I should stretch, but that should is not just because you have to, it's because, you don't have to do anything. But if you do, that's, I mean,
getting philosophical now, isn't it? But you're right.
Like 100%. We can be totally straight about it. I mean, as coaches, like you and I both know that people will just not do things sometimes. And it's like, okay, but if you do go ahead and do that for yourself, you will end up A, feeling a lot better, and B, strengthening yourself in a way that's other than your skills and other than your actual weight lifted. You know what I mean? If that's your style of workout, you get so much more out of it.
Yeah. And I mean, interestingly, that actually I can really apply myself to, because, back 2 years ago, I did an insane amount of jumping when I went to LA the first time for the JRD meetup at the time. And not only did I do it like a severe amount of jumping, which I was fairly accustomed to at that point because I was doing so much anyway, but I hadn't done any stretching either before or really after. Maybe a bit before, but definitely never after. I just walk away and go do whatever's next. And I then suffered from like an inflammatory injury for such a long time, which, being a man and being like, negligent, I just ignored it, and it just put me out of progress and changed things so much just because I didn't stretch and, like you said, flush things out and allow the inflammation to go down and to let my body recover. Because even like active rest and, rest days, they start with like, the proper cool down and the stretching. That's very much the starting point. If you had like the 5 stages of grief, and, grief is the rest day, which everyone hates and no one wants to deal with, like stretching is the first stage. That's
for real.
That's the first point.
I also saw Fee Sagafi, who's a CrossFit athlete who competes and has gone to the CrossFit Games. She posted a little while ago. She went to some kind of competition and then came back and posted on her story on Instagram. Does anyone else get really sick after an intense weekend of competition? And that's kind of the point. Like this is a little bit more tailored to people who are competitive athletes, who are putting themselves through a very high level of exertion beyond just, a standard, workout. When you are going through that much day after day, which could easily be 2 to 5 days of continuous 6-hour, intense workout or competition, that taxes the body, not only physically, which obviously you need to stretch so that you don't lock up and tear something, but imagine we're talking about doing a cool down after a 1 to 2 hour workout so that you clear things out of your system. And you might do that 3-4 times a week. Imagine working out for 6 hours at least several times in a row and then not clearing that out of your system, right? That kind of really highlights how much is built up, how much, I guess the word is monocytes. I need to find the actual word. It's kind of slipping my brain right now, but all of the small little anatomical things that are building up in your body, imagine how much more is built up during that time. And that's why it's so important to go and, slow down, stretch, get your body completely cleared out.
Yeah. And I mean, like taking it a step back from jump rope specifically, just in general when it comes to training, like a lot of people that go to the gym and, lift weights and, they follow these training protocols, they too experience this themselves. Because they get like almost like chronic and severe overtraining syndrome, where they've done so much excessive volume, their body's not recovered because they won't ever do a deload week, and their body can't recover from it, and it affects the immune system, and they get genuinely ill, like flu, because their body is so taxed from trying to recover, not being given the time to recover. So it's constantly like, it's like giving a kid at school like more lessons and more homework than he has time to do. So they're going to fall behind, and then that suffers in the results of, their exams fail because they're overworked and they've not had time to get ahead. The body's the same thing. And actually, when you get ill, this actually happens mentally anyway, because your body's taking everything away and trying to fix itself. And actually, that's why you get tired and fatigued and mentally low, because your body's taking all that energy and put it into trying to fix itself. But you're doing that consciously in a workout. You're putting your body under stress, metabolic stress and mechanical stress, and then wondering why I feel ill afterwards because you've not flushed it out. You've not given it a chance to rest and stretch and allow it to heal. Because that's what you're really doing when you work out, whether it's jump rope or anything else. You put it under stress, you kind of like safely hurt it, and then you let it recover because it's going to come back stronger. If you don't let it come back, like you're not going to get the result you're expecting. And like you said, you're going to get a better result because you're actually giving it a chance to do what it's supposed to do in the first place. And stretching is just an important part of that.
And I just, as you were talking there, I just looked up the words that were kind of skipping my brain.
You did.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I'm trying to get as much detail as possible. So in terms of what's going on, when you do this intense, or not just intense, but any kind of legit exercise, the words are neutrophils.
Technical terms there, legit exercise.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. Yep.
Google's correct terms for things refers to intense exercise as legit.
Well, okay, so I didn't Google. I actually looked up a book that I have on my laptop.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I searched it in the book. But so it's neutrophils and monocytes. So I got the monocyte part right. The reason why this happens, and this is not exact science, this is general information that can be looked up by people who are not a doctor, aka me and you. When you're doing intense workout, there is a level of cortisol and adrenaline spike in the body. And when you do this level 6 and you bring your body back down and you slow down, part of why you can get sick is if you're always shot up with cortisol and adrenaline, it lowers the levels of the white blood cells in your immune system.
Yeah.
So
I mean, we see this in people who like live stressful lives and put their bodies under a different form of stress, like unintentionally. People who, I mean, there's a TED talk on this, a fantastic TED talk on where actually they studied a huge group of people right from like, I think it's like kindergarten or like really, really, really young. And they tried to follow as many as them could till like basically old age. And the ones that lived the most stressful lives had the most like immune system diseases and conditions and died the youngest because of the cortisol that built up and the stress that put on the body. Now, like we've said, a workout is like an intentional version of the same thing. It puts the body under stress, and stress and cortisol isn't remotely healthy in an unfair and excessive amount. So yeah, it's something we already see, but maybe like you said before, people don't they're aware of it, but they don't want to look at it. It's like it's in their periphery. It's like an elephant in the room, and they don't want to like give it the attention it deserves or needs.
100%. And it doesn't click because it's not real, because you can still go to the gym and get the work done regardless. But yeah, exactly. I do want to double back to the neuromuscular training, and I've talked with Shari Hawkins about this a lot, and she's a professional heptathlete, and she spends almost the same amount of time doing recovery as she does her normal workouts.
I remember on her podcast, she talked quite a lot about that, which was actually surprised me, like how much recovery she does.
Yeah, it's pretty insane how much she does. And a topic that she brings up and discusses very well is stretching. She says stretching your nerves. I'm not sure if that is word for word the exact way it's created. I would imagine there's some level of stretching nerves, but the point is that when you're stretching your body back to the locking up you were talking about, you're training your body to move past that locking mechanism. But the biggest thing that I've done personally, and I've seen a lot, is people will go and try to push past that limit of pain. And that's, in my opinion, that is not the way to go about stretching. You instead find that limit, back up about 5% and hold that. Because what happens is
a really important thing.
Yeah, because
go on.
If you can get to that point where you're just about to feel pain and you can relax right there, it's not necessarily that, it's not about going in and pushing so much farther every time. But if you can get just 1% farther today, it'll accumulate over time in a really natural process. But the point there is that a lot of times, and I found this to be very true with myself, if I find that point and I relax right there and I take a couple of deep breaths, I can sink into a stretch farther than I thought I could
For
versus
sure.
trying to push right into it. And then I'm already mad because my body's in pain and I don't want to do this anymore. So not only is it from a utility perspective better for the body, but it's going to help you mentally get through that part of stretching and help you feel good. And the biggest thing that I don't think is talked about in an elaborate way enough is how good the body can feel after mobility and taking the time to really stretch everything out. Because what happens is I mean, effectively, you've just got a bunch of rubber bands in your body. And if some of your rubber bands are tighter than others, and the most common of which is probably, your hip flexors, and then your glute med being stretched out. So your hip flexors being tight, glute med being stretched out means your lower back is going to hurt because you have rubber bands in the front of your body pulling your body in really tight, which happens most often people sitting down at a desk for a lot of time, aka
like I'm probably doing now, which is exactly what you might be doing too, like just sitting down for an hour uninterrupted.
Yeah, and what I've been doing with, lately, editing a bunch of videos. It's very common for me to sit at a desk for 4 to 6 hours, like straight, like easy, or like when I'm editing the podcast, So understanding that, it's funny for me to explain it because there's this feeling that you get if you can legitimately commit yourself to like 20 minutes a day for 3 weeks straight, which is definitely a lot if you're not used to stretching. But if you can do mobility for that amount of time, 20 minutes a day, 3 weeks, I can guarantee that your body is going to feel like completely new. And when I don't do that, when I don't stretch, I feel everything in my body locking up and it feels really not good. And it makes it way harder to perform and do all the things that usually are very easy for me to do from a body skills perspective.
Yeah, for sure. Now I want to double back a little bit, and kind of return to that analogy that I used with the seatbelt, because just for the people that are like have gotten this far and they think, right, stretching sounds like it's been sold to me. Like Nate and Chris have changed my mind, and I want to try stretching and trying to improve my posture and feel like I have a new body. With that seatbelt, that 5% you talked about, it's actually the most important key feature that I was taught at college. And it's like, if you take that seatbelt and you pull it right to the point where it stops and it locks, if you then keep pulling it, you're just breaking the system. Like it's not actually going any further.
Yes.
It shouldn't damage the seatbelt. You have to put it back like 5%, relax off, and then slowly draw it forward. And then it keeps on going. And then it goes on further. And that, like you said, is exactly what the body actually wants to do there, rather than, again, brute force. And the way to achieve that is by understanding the time that the body has this mechanism in place. It's about 15 to 20 seconds. So going off what you said before, you want to take it, if anybody's wanting to do this kind of stretch, it would be a static stretch, best done lying down or sitting down. So your blood pressure is as low as possible, and you're in that level 6, that stage 6. So you're in the lowest possible energy zone, and you want to hold that stretch just like 5% away from where there would be pain, and then you want to hold it for a good 20 seconds. Breathe deep, and then what you'll notice is literally on like that second mark, the neuromuscular signaling that's telling your body don't stretch further switches off.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you do is you take another deep breath, relax your core. You reach further, and in my head, I'm thinking of a hamstring stretch because I do this a lot because they're tight, baby, they're tight.
Mm-hmm.
And you like you said, you surprise yourself with how much further. Now, if you're doing this and you want to go, you want to do a long, really good session, this can be done 3 or 4 times in a row because the body obviously doesn't just switch off altogether and go, nah, never mind. It just pushes that point further back. Just like how if you took that seatbelt and you then yanked it again, it's going to put it at a new point. So then you find the new point, 5% away, another sort of 15, 20 seconds, and you repeat that cycle. And I've done this with clients and when I was training, and we did this with lying down hamstring stretches. So you lie down on your back, facing the ceiling, and you bring one leg up. And for most people in that sort of stretch, they have to bend the opposite leg. But if you straighten the leg that's on the floor, lifting one leg up, and they get that really terrible range of motion that most people are familiar with, you do this PNF stretch 3, maybe 4 times, they go way past that kind of vertical, healthy position. And then if you then leave them alone, give them 30 seconds, check the other leg's still super tight, and then you return back to the leg you stretched, it still has that level of flexibility you've achieved, and it keeps it for a time being because the body's kind of thinking, oh, this is safe, and it's kind of like just checking it and making sure. And then, like you said, doing that several times over and over again teaches the body that it can be brought to this point, and eventually the body learns to keep that as the new point. It makes a pin and it goes, right, this is now safe, and that it keeps doing that the more that you do it. So anybody that's wanting to do a stretch like this to improve their balance and like their posture and their comfort and not have these tightnesses, and for all the different reasons we've said that it would be good to do, that's how you do it. And that's and it's actually interesting because you can do this with a partner. I don't know if you're familiar with this technique, but there's a way you can do it with your partner where your partner actually holds the stretch for you and applies the pressure.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then when you get to the point where that 20-second hits, you then actually trick the body by making it think you're not at that stretch point, by you then applying the pressure to your partner to resist, so almost contract the muscle. You hold that for like 5 seconds, like maximum effort, and then relax straight away. And then when your partner then goes to do the next stage, like you get like almost 10 times the benefit. Like you literally, it will shock you how quickly that will work. And then you repeat that cycle. It's like a very small adjustment. Have you actually used that with a client before, like yourself? Because I've not had the opportunity really much to use that, but when I did do it and it was demonstrated to me at college, like I was actually mind blown how different that made things, like literally on the spot. Like it was like an instant difference, and I was shocked. Have you ever used it at all or had any experience personally with it?
I haven't used it with any clients, but I have done it myself many, many times back in like high school when I was training a lot. And that was one of the best stretches that I would do for sure because of all the reasons that you just explained.
It's honestly so nice. I had it done to me at college and then like vice versa to the other person. And yeah, feeling that difference between one leg and the other for like demonstration. Obviously, I don't recommend you do one leg only, for anybody that's listening. But obviously in college, we did it for the purpose of like, you can feel how different this leg is now. That's proof enough. And it was really shocking.
Mm-hmm.
Going off of that, we've talked a lot about stretches we like and
real
the
quick,
feelings are good. Go on.
I actually have one thing that I want to add to that you brought up and I want to kind of highlight again. I would really treat stretching the same way people treat other exercises. I would give it sets and reps. It's one of the best things that I've done for myself in terms of gamifying the process and just adding sets and reps of everything and going through it all multiple times. And to tag onto that, I've always found that the sequence that I do certain stretches really can change the way those sets and reps play out. So this would be better done with a coach who understands, anatomy, or if you understand anatomy, then it's perfect. But so for me personally, like doing a pigeon stretch where I'm stretching a little bit of the IT band, a lot of the glutes. If I do that while I'm cold and I just jump into it, it's usually harder and more painful versus if I do touching my toes and I stretch my calves, it's way easier because I don't have those extra tight rubber bands making it more difficult. So definitely I would recommend playing with the order in which you do your stretches during your sets and reps because it can make a really big difference.
Yeah, no, definitely. I would also recommend that. So with all of that we've talked about, we've done a lot of positivity when it comes to stretching and things that the enjoyment we personally get from the reward of stretching. But of course, I have to ask you, what's your least favorite stretch? Like, if you had to pick one that you wish you'd never had to do again.
Honestly, it probably would be the splits. Like I used to train those back in high school and then I stopped, and now I have no interest in doing that ever again because it is, I probably should because it highlights a lot of weaknesses, but like stretching the splits is so hard because everything just gets all wonky when I do that. And I really don't like that one. What about you?
Oh, do you know what? I was tossing up between like two. I would probably say, just because I get bored so easily and I do struggle myself personally even though we've both talked about this a lot and said how much we approve of it, I still do find it hard in practice. It can be, a person that doesn't take my own advice. So I'd say hamstrings, simply because there's so much of the hamstrings made up of tendon you really have to attack them with a lot of sets and reps to really effectively work them. They're not like other muscles where they're like mostly muscle and like a little bit of tendon. They're mostly tendon. So much so that the names of the individual parts literally have the word tendon in them because they're just tendon. So you have to, I literally will stretch them with like really wide stance, the narrow stance, all the way until I've got like a pike, just so I know I have really stretched them, and I hate it because they take so long, and because I don't take my own advice and I don't gamify it and try to enjoy it. Yeah, I feel better after I've done it, but I hate the process of getting to the point where I've enjoyed it. I want that instant gratification, like I do with a lot of other things. So that's probably my least favorite stretch.
I find that my best stretching sessions are when I don't want to work out and I end up taking 45 minutes to procrastinate the workout. So
and that ends up being stretching.
It ends up being a stretching workout, yeah. So that might be the goal, is to go in with a really hard workout on your mind and be like, well, let me just stretch a little bit longer. And that might be what it takes.
Yeah. That's a good idea, actually. Go in thinking I'm going to do a 1 rep max on like my worst lift, and then I'll be like, I could stretch a little bit more.
Yes, exactly. Let's we've been talking for an hour now, and this has been really good. I'm really glad that we're diving into
an
all
hour.
This.
Wow.
Yeah, let's go into some Q&A, because you and I put out some really random Q&A posts on our stories on Instagram, asking people to ask us any kind of question, really, and we got some pretty solid responses that I want to dig into here. Okay, do you want to start?
How many questions do you have? Like, do you have like 2 or 3, or like?
Yeah, I've got a few here. It depends on how many we can really get through, but yeah, I've got a couple.
Okay, I'll go first, because the first question I want to ask you really neatly brings it full circle on what we were talking about earlier with the struggle of learning a new skill. And it's a really nice question. It just says, how long does it take to become as good as you are? And obviously I take the word you to mean like me and the other athletes here that do a lot of high level skills now. And that kind of neatly ties back to our previous conversation of learning a new skill. So I'm going to ask you, let you answer first, and then I'll add on anything I can think of that adds value. But how long does it take to get as good as you are, Nate? Because you are awesome.
Thank you. You are awesome, dude. High five through the internet. Cheers. Bam. That was a moment. In terms of so the question was, how long does it take to get good?
Yeah, or as good as you are. So like this kind of level of proficiency where you can really just do anything you apply yourself to in a jump rope point.
I would, the number one thing I would say is to change the question and not set a person marker, but set a skill marker.
Okay. Yeah.
Because if you set a person marker, you're entering into a zone of comparison that you're probably never going to win. And if you do chase that, you'll be competing against another person and their own goals and accomplishments versus your own. So I would first strip away the person and make it a list of skills, which I'm sure that person was specifically asking. They meant to ask for a set of skills, but it's worth.
That's a good way to start this question. So I'm going to review the question, answer that question instead.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that's a good spot to start. But in terms of how long does it take to get a quadruple under sequence of 5 to 10 multiples, to get backflip, to get handstand, triple under frog, or these different skills and like releases and stuff. It's really hard to give an answer to that, because on one hand, you could have someone like me. I genuinely believe that I've progressed relatively slowly, and I think the reason is because I think that it has to do with environment. I've always seen in the competitive world, and honestly, in the enthusiast world too, with jumpers who are in London or in the UK around you, learn really quickly because it's the environment and who's pushing them. And Instagram does a really good job, or just the Instagram community is phenomenal with helping each other out and providing that kind of a good virtual environment. But
that's very true.
If you can position yourself, and I've seen jumpers literally move across the country to be with other jumpers, and then the skill level, like it's factorial. It shoots up like crazy because everyone comes to the table and tries to push, not even tries to push each other, but they naturally just get better and better and better. So in terms of, again, I think that's probably not, I don't think anyone's planning on, moving, but in terms of,
So your only advice there is, I can't give you a specific time length. Go live next to a professional and just let them push you.
yeah,
That's your
apparently,
advice.
yeah, move to Hot Dog USA and go hang out with those kids, or like somewhere in, Idaho with Seth and Porter and just go
Yeah.
hang out with them a bunch. But
I
no,
was going to say, are they looking for roommates?
yeah, for real. But okay, so that's kind of, that would be like my truest all encompassing answer, but I guess the more tactical answer, which is what's being requested, is that identify in terms of how long will it take. It depends on how much time you put into it. So if you have a coach that knows what they're talking about, if you have a set of skills that you're after, and they can be crazy skills, it doesn't have to be, I'm really close to a toad. It can be like, I'm looking to do a TJ quad and I can barely do a toad yet. Like, that is very real.
Yeah.
There's only a few levels of skills that I would say are not unattainable, but are just on a completely different level. But in terms of most skills and most learning, like you were explaining earlier, your body can achieve, so your hardware is really good, and especially as you're training over and over, your hardware will get better and better and better. But time wise, I mean, if you set a goal for yourself with a nice range of skills that is makes sense or is laid out to you by a coach who knows how to lay out those skills, I mean, you could be looking at a pretty massive increase within 6 months to a year. I mean, I've seen, like, a good example is you. Like, you specifically have, I mean, let's be real, dude. Like, your skill level has grown like out of this world. It hasn't even been a year since the last time. Well, actually, since the first time we hung out in last June.
Yeah.
It hasn't even been a year yet, and you've already, your proficiency, your technical skills, your everything has gotten like way, way better. And that's because you've taken the time to understand how to practice the right way. And when it really comes down to it, you've put in the reps consistently day after day after day with strategic and appropriate rests and balances. Yeah, dude. I mean, like, you're a really good example of the tactical version of that, because you've done what needs to be done to get better. And you know what I mean? So yeah.
I think if I was going to answer the question and add any value to what you just said, because you said so much and so much of value tactically and otherwise, I would just say, if we're going to use me as an example, I think regardless of how many hours you're prepared to put in, it's how you use those hours. And I would like to say I'm proud of the fact that, for me, I feel like I've used those hours in a worthwhile way to allow myself to the best potential for getting those skills in a reasonably good sort of time. It's the same as with any skill. Like, if you go to school, if you waste the hours while you're at that school, you're not going to get the same results when you leave as if you actually put in the work whilst you're there. And I think that's why I think I'm proud of me being the example you draw from that, because I feel like I've made the right decisions with how I practice and being effective when I practice.
And
so I think that's how I would answer that question.
That's a solid answer. And I would also, to add again, I would say that the amount of quality that you put into that time has to match what you're trying to get out of it. So for you specifically,
correct.
I know, because we worked together, you wanted to learn as much as possible and get as good as possible, as fast as possible. That was the goal. For some people, they might want to get a TJ, and that's a good goal. And they want to show up every day and do a nice, HIIT style workout and sweat a little bit. And in that context, in that scenario, it's a spectrum, right? Like, you don't have to go 0 or 100. You can choose, okay, 75%. And then you can gauge what to put in. And the whole point of doing that is so that you leave the gym feeling happy about yourself.
I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to, because everyone does this to feel healthy and feel good, right? Mentally and physically. And a good example of that, actually, I feel like it would be drawing Jimmy back into this, that he has a certain set of skills which he has honed to a very high level. And because he has chosen where on that spectrum he wants to sit, now that he's gone through his own fitness journey, and he's now at that level where he's chosen what style he wants to be and to encompass, and he fits in that spectrum. and that's what he chooses to practice. And in his time, he kills it. He does so well, because he uses his time how he just intends to, or he puts in what he intends to get out of it, and it shows.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And Jimmy was actually another really good example for sure.
Because you're right, it's definitely a spectrum.
I've got a question here on my end if you're ready to switch.
Go on.
Yeah, feel good about this one?
Yeah. Oh, and for the people that are aware or that aren't aware, we haven't told each other these Q&A questions in advance, so these are like completely off the cuff.
Oh,
so
yeah,
I've got no idea what Nate is about to ask me. Like, he could ask me the most difficult question. I'd be like,
okay,
for the next 10 minutes. So let's go.
I'm actually going to do two, and what you just said, not to contradict you, is a little bit of a lie, because I did tell you one question so that we could be thinking about it. Yeah, just one of them.
But I won't lie, I've forgotten what the question was, so it's going to be another surprise anyway.
Well then, yeah, perfect. So I've got two. One's just really quick, and it's just kind of funny. But the first one is: do you always have a jump rope while you travel? My answer is like pretty much yes, 99% of the time. What is yours?
Pretty much 99% of the time, to be honest.
Yeah.
I've always got one on me, and I've learned from a couple of experiences when the one time I didn't have one and someone really even wanted to train, like a quick client or just wanted to see something, and it would have been a perfect time to have had a jump rope at that time.
Yep.
So I've learned from my own mistake, and I'll carry on regardless. Like, you never know when you're going to need to do a quick video for someone on Instagram, like a DM, or when you're going to have like an epiphany on a skill that you want to be working on. You don't know. So 99% of the time, easy.
Yep. And then the second question, that's really the main question. I really like this one. If you had to make a jump rope trivia, what would the categories be?
Oh,
my first one would be memeable jump rope skills.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good start. It's a very, very strong start. Because if we're thinking like a pub quiz with all the categories,
or
that is
like yeah, like Jeopardy style.
Oh, I wasn't thinking that way, but that also makes sense. Like, either way. Okay. Oh, I would have to say something like, you said in a previous podcast about like the culture around like the Saturday camps and stuff,
mm-hmm.
and like the tags and badges that people give out. I would have to say, just for to keep that culture alive in the context of this quiz, I would have to say there'd have to be around a category around that kind of culture, like really niche culture. Just to, because there's always going to be general knowledge stuff, and then there's going to be super niche stuff. That's one of the categories I think would have to be in there, because I find it really interesting, like culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that one a lot.
Culture isn't always obvious. You have to really be there, quite literally, to really get it. And that's why I think those questions would be really interesting, because the answers aren't going to be something you can just get right unless you really know. And that really proves to be something that's important in any sport or community. What would your next category be?
Honestly, similar to what you just said, it probably would be skill names. So like the person whose name matches a skill. So like ASTSEB, and the people who invented the skill. So like
that's a pretty solid one. I think it's one that most people actually wouldn't get right, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, or like it's back to your point, like you had to be there kind of a thing. Like, so for example, maybe not like invented, but like who did it the first time. So like the Moneymaker, the Kamikaze Frog, who was the first person to do that.
Oh, I've got that one. That one's in the bank. That's Nick Woodard.
Yeah.
I bet. It's the name Moneymaker. That's the only one that I think I know for sure, confident enough to get right on the podcast. If you give me another one, I probably won't get it right.
Well, I mean, at this point, like the crazier things that you put out, it ends up just being Seth or Porter over and over and over.
So you've got Seth 1, Seth 2, Seth 3, Seth 4.
Yeah, for real.
Because the initials only hold up for one skill, so you just number them.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that'd be kind of a fun one, is like to think about some of the more specific skills that have evolved. And who'd be really good at that would be Mike. Mike would crush that.
Yeah. Do you know what? Anytime I have a question about that, funnily enough, and he's going to chuckle if he hears this, I literally will call him straight away. Even though we are in different time zones and he's a very busy person, I'll call him and just go, who invented the EB? Just for that question, because I know that he's going to know. And I know that he's going to enjoy that he can share that knowledge with me. So I love that. So yeah, that's Mike.
He's like straight up OG. Also,
exactly.
I want to say it again because he doesn't say it enough. Mike invented the Mick.
Yeah. If anyone's confused about that, Mick is just the name because he's humble, like humble AF. Like it should be called the Mike, but he won't let it be called that because he doesn't want to just show off that he coined it. But it's also just amazing how he coined it because he didn't just do like a standard Mick that everyone learns. He did it. Is like a 360 toad, right? Is that something like that? Like, is a triple? Am I getting that slightly wrong?
No, you're right. Let me keep going. Let me double check because I want to get this skill exactly right. So I'll double check this as we're talking. But yeah, it was not a strict Mick.
No, because like he said, like as he tells the story, and for anybody that hasn't heard this story already, because I think it's been mentioned a few times on the podcast, but it's an excellent story. Like the idea of doing a Mick and having that turn emotion isn't unfamiliar in jump rope, but it wasn't something that everyone was shouting about and doing all the time like they are now. Like Avery, who does the magic that he does with Micks, and then let's jump LA, Mike, threw that down in however you're going to correctly describe that skill, and that I think it's just from that moment it was just like, right, this is something that people are interested in now because he just did it. And to be honest, the amazing thing is, when I hung out with him in LA in last June, to see him do a Mick, to see the Mick creator do a Mick in person was like just unbelievably amazing because he does them so smoothly. Like, it's like how a parent would talk and understand the mind of their own child because they're like kind of connected on a different level. Like he just has a connection with that trick, that skill. And seeing him do it is just like effortless.
So I've got it here.
Have you? Brilliant. I was kind of stalling a little bit because I wanted to give you time to find.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I've got it here. It's called the BC Mick Twister. So, so if you're familiar with a Marley, it's like a Marley in the air. But so if you're standing forward, you turn the way Mike did it. He turned to the right, so he does a 180 to the right. As he's going backwards, he puts his left hand behind underneath his knee and lifts his knee up and lets go, and then finishes another 180, so a full 360, and then spins the Mick and then catches it forward, which I will link that up in the show notes because I've got it here, and it's really phenomenal to watch it, and it's a very difficult trick. And the fact that he pulled this off years ago is incredible.
And also, as I understand it from his podcast, or maybe it was a conversation we had, he did a few other very similar skills on the same day at the same time, just because people suggested them, that he's never done to this day again, and just did them off the cuff because he's just that awesome of a jumper and a person. He was just like, oh, let's just try this quad with a Mick while we're turning 360, and then did them. And I was like, I'm not going to name that. That's just done. And then like just moved on with his life. And I just love that about him. Like he is OG
forever. Mike Dog. Yeah, 100%. And that should be his new Instagram handle, OG Mike Dog.
I think he should get his name changed by Depot. I think that should just be his name.
Sweet. Yeah, let's make a petition, dude.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to the next question here. Your turn.
Okay, so this is an interesting one because I have what I think is a logical answer, but I think you might have information that would make this an interesting discussion. So, are heavy jump ropes, so heavy ropes, going to burn any more calories in a significant way than a normal rope, like a normal standard beaded rope compared to a heavy rope? Is there going to be a significant difference in the calories that you burn doing that as a workout for the same length of time? You first.
Yeah, so my answer to this is going to be yes. And when I at RX we did a small study, and I'm not sure if they've put out the results yet. I have to double check on that, but there was a small study done. This is all preliminary information, so this might change. But we tested the difference between the Evo bare wire cable, between a standard 3-ounce rope, a half pound, a full pound, and the drag rope. And I think you can lump the 3/4 pound and the 1 pound together. Those two are similar enough where they'll get the same stimulus, and you can also add the drag rope in that category. And what we saw and what you feel when you're doing this is a massive increase in heart rate. Like way more. Even when you're proficient, even when you know how to use a jump rope effectively, actually it's better when you know how to use a jump rope effectively, you will get jump for jump, more work done, which to my understanding about calories and how energy is used is going to burn more.
Interesting. See, when I've been asked this question before, I've kind of attacked it at almost the same angle, but I guess just missed the point, I think. Because when you mentioned the heart rate, I was thinking more at the end of, right, the biggest muscles in the body are going to be in the legs. And for that point of view, you're jumping a rope, right? So you're not going to feel that difference in your legs where a lot of calories are going to be burned, like churned out. And in your wrists and your arms, like, because there's such a lot of fine motor control muscles, like I had logically come to the conclusion that most of that feeling came from the extreme increase in blood pressure you get from doing upper body exercises versus lower body, which is why, like, they recommend with clients you don't do too much upper body exercise when they have excessive high blood pressure because of that. So I figured that had something to do with it. But it's actually interesting you point out the heart rate specifically, because that's basically the exact same thing but on its head, which is interesting.
Well, another way to look at that too is if you imagine, you have a set limit of ATP stores in the body. And I would imagine there's a certain amount that is muscle specific, but when you're jumping, you're using most of your muscles together, but at different intensities. But if you're taxing your arms, which if you know how to use a rope correctly, you're gonna feel the burn in your arms, but it's not gonna be, it's noticeable, but that.
Yeah. I only get arm burn, like forearm burn, when it's the drag rope specifically, because that resistance is so much greater. So I get what you mean in that, when you're proficient, like a standard, more lightweight rope, you're not going to feel it at a lower level because you're proficient.
But what the heavy ropes will do is, if they're using those muscles in your upper body significantly more than that lighter rope, you're draining your ATP stores faster, just maintaining what is easier with a lighter rope. And then with lower ATP stores, you now don't have as many resources to pump to your legs. So in my mind, it makes sense, and this could be wrong, but in my mind, it makes sense that your larger muscles would then have to work harder because you've taken out the ATP stores faster.
Interesting.
Does that make sense? This could all be a bunch of hogwash. Like, I'm not a biologist, but I think
this is why we have this kind of coaching hour to ask questions where we can discuss something, attack it from a few different angles, and provide a bit of insight and information on what might be the answer. Because the beautiful thing with science is there isn't necessarily, for questions that are unanswered, there isn't an answer. And it's a matter of investigating to get to what is the most probable answer. And that's true of any science that is very, very tested and rigorous. That it's just our absolute best guess that has a lot of backing, but it's still always just a guess, because you can never really know anything in science truly, because you're always observing it. And it's always with a bias. So I like the fact that we've both had this kind of logical approach and kind of come at a different conclusion using what we both understand of, like, physiology and biology, which it only interests me more to find out what the real answer is, and, like, maybe get another study going, because that would be interesting. Because it's a very important question that a lot of people ask. Which rope do I use? Do I use a heavier rope that's harder to use, but is going to feel like more of a burn, or is it actually no more effective and it's just more taxing on my wrists? But that's interesting. That makes me want to know the answer.
Well, here's where I think that what I said is wrong. So here's where I think that the heavy rope won't. Yeah, here's where I think the heavy rope won't be as effective. If you don't know how to use it and you don't have efficient mechanics, you will hit a flat wall and will not be able to jump anymore. I've done it myself when I've tried to see how much I can possibly do with the heavy ropes. The fatigue is not just, oh man, I'm tired. It's my body can no longer turn this rope. And that happens. And so if you don't know how to use it properly and you hit that wall at 30 seconds or a minute, and then you take a massive rest and you hit it again, depending on what your goals are, depending on how you're trying to train, but if we're looking at it from a sustained heart rate perspective, you may not get as great of a workout because you're not sustaining your heart rate over the same duration that you would have with a lighter 3-ounce or standard cable weight.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, because whenever I listen to a lot of fitness influencers or people with large followings that try to base a lot of their advice on science, they will give you the answer in a technical way like we have just done, and apply it to, an athlete or an ideal situation or a situation where there isn't any nuances. But then they'll always apply it to the practical element. Like, what's the average person actually going to see out of this? And often the answer is the exact opposite, because you have nuances. And so I think if we were to make this answer way shorter than we've made it, the answer would be, for the absolute beginner or someone who isn't overly proficient, the difference isn't enough to warrant doing it in the first place until you're proficient enough. So it might be like a bell curve, like where it's not efficient at all, and then there's a sudden point where it becomes suddenly more effective. Like you said, there are people who now have a level of proficiency where they don't just burn out and are unable to turn the rope. So I feel like it's a no, depending on your level of proficiency, and then it becomes a yes.
Well,
would you agree with that to some extent?
Kind of. My perspective, my philosophy is that, the whole reason, and we've talked about this because we met up and then we talked about all this training knowledge and stuff. The goal of being efficient is to be versatile. It's not just to do a bunch of really cool skills. If that's what you want to do, awesome. But being highly skilled and efficient allows you to be versatile, to grab any rope you want, to do any kind of workout you want. And again, it comes down to what your goals are, of course, but in the context of a beginner, like, get a 1 pound rope and use it and see how, I don't know, that might be really fun. But pay attention to what your form looks like, because a lot of times with someone who's brand new, a 3-ounce cable is going to be the best to have feedback, but still not be too heavy to prevent changing your form. But like a 1 pound rope could honestly just destroy your form, because you're trying so hard just to hold on, you can't even consider pulling your elbows back. So now, again, I'm not saying no. I'm not saying don't do something, because I think
it's interesting, because it's hard to just give a one-word answer to this kind of question, because there isn't a one-word answer.
There isn't, exactly. If anyone
ever said no, but yes.
If anyone ever, honest, if anyone ever gives you a one-word answer, they're either specifically they're either talking within a very specific context, or they're just putting out some kind of marketing materials that you'll click on their website, which is not necessarily bad, because I will be putting out stuff too that has a very specific title in order to grab a certain audience. But the question then,
I've done that already myself, and there isn't anything bad in that, because the context is there. It's just knowing there's context there when giving the answer, rather than being generalized.
And it comes down to, the asterisk right there. Are you providing context? Are you discussing why that headline or that statement makes sense? Or are you just using it for clicks? And that's a very big difference, and it's worth taking the time and looking into what you're reading to determine that difference.
Yeah.
And if you ever see that with me, call me out.
Well, actually, no, I'm kidding.
Yeah, right. There was this one time that you didn't post on Instagram for 2 months straight. Oh, wait, that was now.
Except for like one Q&A you put on your story, and I was like, dude, it's all taken, no give. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, well done. Well done. That is funny.
Mic drop or mix drop?
Well, Mike doesn't drop his mix anymore, so that's kind of an awkward little paradox.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Let's do one more question, and I'll bring this one up. Someone said, let me know if you're looking for social media growth. Thank you, Spambot. So we're not going to go with that one.
Oh my God, I had the exact same one.
Yeah, that's always fun to get. I have one that is, again, not going to have a direct answer, because those are the most interesting ones to discuss.
Sure.
This one is, how do you train flow into your sequences?
Ask Sonny.
Ask Sonny, yeah, right? Rope flow queen.
Literally. That's a really interesting question, should I say, because the answer requires you to define what they mean by flow, because a lot of people have different flows of equally good measure. But I think if I was going to answer this, there would be two parts to my answer. The first part would be from an efficiency proficiency point of view, that for it to flow, like if you were performing a piece of music, it has to be able to be coherent. So you have to be able to do, say, a set of skills in a way that isn't disjointed, the rhythm's right, the turning's correct, so that the skills flow correctly. But then, like in music, are you familiar with the term vibrato?
I'm not actually. I have very base level understanding of music.
Left ear, right ear.
Yeah. That's called mono, right? I'm just kidding.
Right. So vibrato is the idea that if you're playing, say, Mozart or like a really passionate piece of music, for example, it's the idea that your time signature of just going 1, 2, 3, 4 can kind of like drift in and out slightly for like to produce emotion or energy. And that's no different to how if I'm talking to you, I would speed up and slow down for emphasis, for intonation, rather than just being monotone and saying this is a sentence. And I would say that alongside the part one of my answer of being able to flow correctly and have the skills be cohesive, just like a piece of music, there has to be that level of vibrato in the sense that if you're changing the way that flows, is it with purpose and is it with consistent purpose? Like if you think of, say, Sonny, for example, because she's a brilliant example, there are certain things that she does in the certain ways that she does them that makes the whole thing flow because she does them consistently in any of the skills she does. It's like a special glue that she has in the way she performs. And my best example, if you was to take the person away from it, is you can do a mick in a very technical way. You can do it with the swing, the release, the revolution, the catch. But everyone does a mick very slightly differently in their style. And if you were to take like someone's hand and their mick and not have their body, to some extent, for certain professionals or certain athletes or certain people in this community, you can probably guess who they are by their, not just by their hand. Obviously, that'd be a bit weird. That's a bit of a cheat. But by the way they flow their mick. And that doesn't come down to the part one of the answer. It's the part two in the vibrato, which is what I'm going to keep calling it. And how that works well with part one. I think that's how I'm going to have to answer that question. So it's the only way I can think of giving a tangible answer other than meh, flow. So
Yeah.
what would you say?
I think you also, well, in addition to what you just said, I mean, that is a huge part of flow is, like you said, vibrato, being comfortable with the skills you're doing. I think another big part is choosing to put your skills in a sequence that makes a lot of sense. So
that's super true.
So
and
some skills,
different way of answering the question.
Well, yeah, some, but it kind of mixes with what you said, because in some skills, it is very tangible. Like when you do your leg placement crosses, you have an inverse toad with a swing to an elephant. You know what I mean? And like that all from moving your body from one position to another makes a lot of sense. A good example of this,
it feels natural.
Exactly. A good example from this is like swing, toad, and then caboose, because you've already crossed one arm and it's not that hard to go into the next cross.
Correct. Yeah. It's like what's the path of least resistance for my body and this skill, and that's why things like a TJ look so effortless, because when done right, that flow is just inherent in the majority of that skill, which is a very similar example to what you just gave, because it's still also a toad placement. So yeah,
I think
totally.
The other part of that too touches on what you said, because the way I catch my mic is different. I'm really comfortable catching it with my hand going behind my back. So you'll see that whenever I catch mix, I always go into like a 180 turn with my hand behind my back. And that's what works for me because of where my hand is, where the rope's coming. One that does not flow well that I would like to still, I mean, I'm going to keep training, is releasing behind the back and then catching it into a cross forward. And that for me has so when you do a mick, usually your arm crosses the body and you swing on the opposite side of the hand that's turning. So turning with your right hand, it usually is on the left side of your body. But if you do same side, which is what I'm talking about, releasing the mick, right hand, right side, and catching that into a cross, it does flow well. But for me right now, as I'm still refining this, I'm not catching the handle. I'm catching like the neck of the rope, which is not flowing. but the first part does work. So it's like the flow really comes down to how you do skills and what works for you, but you only figure that out by doing a lot of skills over and over and over and over.
Yeah, and that actually neatly goes back to the music kind of analogy, because you'll have someone who is very good at improv, and you'll say, well, how do you make the improv just sound like it was written already? And they'll often say there's these couplings of certain notes or certain progressions that always sound good, and it's just a matter of moving from one to the other in a way that makes sense, that's natural, that I've practiced so many times that I can just pull them out. And like you just said, and then that's what makes certain improv artists sound so good, because they can do exactly what you just did, but with a musical instrument. So it's the same skill, and that's actually a skill you can practice as a separate skill, other than just like skill acquisition. You can practice having these little skills that you can flow from one to the other. Like you said with your mic, and you described another mic that you aren't very good at in terms of being flow. You can practice flow in that respect, which is interesting, because it seems intangible, but it isn't. It's just on the side, on that spectrum of intangible. It's kind of closer to that end, but you can still practice it, just like you can practice creativity, which is one of my favorite things that anyone has ever said on this podcast, because it's like an intangible thing that we can treat tangibly.
Exactly. And creativity is really just like you said with the music. You've learned X amount of inputs, and you're just reordering and trying different outputs over and over and over. But yeah, man. So at this point, we're about an hour and a half in. This has been a really stacked episode, and more than an hour. We got a coaching hour and a half. So
we've got a redundant name, like false advertising.
Seriously. Well, there we go. We're catching ourselves in this false advertising. Jeez, that didn't take long.
I know, right? To me.
All right, man. I think that now would be a good time to kind of close everything out. Anything else that you'd like to add?
No, except when are you going to learn the Sunny DTS? Because come on, dude.
Yeah, I know, I'm slacking. Jeez. Listen, once I see like Porter do it, then I'll start to think that it's possible for someone else besides the guy who did it. So honestly.
Oh, no, I don't think I have any more questions. Do you?
No, I think that's it. We're just going to have to, if we come up with any questions once we hit stop, we're just going to have to do another episode of the coaching hour. This is for sure happening again.
I mean, that's a little tease that we're just going to have to leave people with. I feel like that's obligatory.
Yeah, obligatory and not Oh, I messed that one up.
So we managed to get an hour and a half, and no, you're not cutting that out. You're leaving that in, because it's hilarious. We've gone for an hour and a half,
and now my brain is just fried, and I can't say obligatory or Yeah, I don't know. I can't even. Maybe there's just not another way to say that. I feel like there is. Obligated.
Obligatory or obligatory.
There it is. There it is. Obligatory.
The English
obligatory
way of saying the English language is why that's successful in my accent. Sorry, dude.
Sorry, dude. Better luck with the jump rope. Nice. All right, man. I think that's about good for this episode. Definitely let you get back to your day, and I'm glad we got to do this, man. This was really fun.
Let's do it again sometime.
For sure.